This is one of 3 parts of a video showing how to do the first 50-hour service on an RK37. I tried to find a video online to show. There's really no good videos. So going to do, it's a hydrostatic transmission. So we're going to start with changing the hydraulic / transmission fluid. You've got a drain plug underneath the tractor, be more pretty much underneath your driver's seat, between the rear wheels. It's a 22mm head. I recommend using a 6-point socket to break it loose so you don't strip it, because mine was extremely tight. You then have a screen right there in that hose. You have a hose clamp, 1/4-inch socket you need, or nut driver to take the clamp off. Then 2 bolts that holds the screen in. Make sure you drain your oil before you take that out, or you'll end up with an oil bath. It's got 2 bolts with 9/16 or 14 head. Make sure you have then on the side, you're sitting on the seat, be on your left side, closest to your left wheel, right above your toolbox and your step. Look back in there and you'll see the filter for the hydraulics. So to do this job, you will need a oil filter wrench or oil filter pliers. You will need a 22mm 6-point socket for the drain plug, and a 9/16 or a 14 wrench for taking the screen out, which is right there. Forgive me if this is not the greatest quality. I just bought a new camera and learning doing all this. Sorry, it's kind of hard to hold the camera and do this all at once. I've already went and pre-loosened this because I needed both hands with the breaker bar. Make sure you have plenty of capacity in your drain pans, because the transmission hydraulics holds a little over 9 gallons. So you want to make sure you've got plenty of capacity, or you will have a big mess on your floor. Roll King has some bigger drain pans that are pretty nice. And here we go. I'm going to cut out and I'll be back after this drains. I ended up having to get a band type regular filter wrench. I tried the pliers. They wouldn't get a good enough grip. It is extremely tight, be forewarned, just like the drain plug was. And I will give an update as far as how much fluid this actually holds. I was told 9 gallons, but I most certainly did not drain 9 gallons out of it. So I don't believe that the 9 gallons is correct. Down in the description below, I will put actual capacity of how many gallons it took to fill it. And also later in the video, it should show how much that I did put in it. And make sure when you're draining out that you loosen your vent on your drain plug, because I forgot to loosen the vent and ended up with quite a bit of oil all over the floor. So just make sure you don't make the same mistake I did. I'll leave the oil filter off for a while to drain. Next will be getting the strainer screen right there. Hopefully that's showing up good. I will come back in a second. Loosen up this clamp. Sorry, it's kind of hard to hold the camera and lay on your head and do everything. There is a bolt that holds the line to the transmission casing. Hopefully you can see that right there. There's where the oil filter goes to kind of give you an idea on the location. You will have to get some kind of pry bar in there. Be careful so you don't break anything. Kind of pry the hose off. Let it drain till you can get all of it out and pull that strainer out. That bolt that I showed you back there, it's removed at the moment. It has a nut on the back of it. You will need two 12mm wrenches. Take that bolt nut completely off. That way you can get your hose totally pulled back out of the way. Loosen up your second hose clamp so that you can spin your hose up out of the way. And you can get your two bolts broke loose. Now everything on this so far, the drain plug for the transmission, the oil filter, and the bolts for that screen has been extremely tight. So make sure you're using good tools so you don't stripping around your bolts. I'll come back to it as soon as I get the bolts out when I'm pulling it out. Take a, as soon as I find it here. Sorry, there it is. Took a pry bar, but you can take any kind of bar, kind of shove in there. That way that'll hold that pipe totally up out of your way because it wants to drop right in your way. Again, sorry, it's kind of hard to hold this and do this upside down. So I apologize for the different angles. Again, make sure you've drained your oil first so you do not end up with an oil bath. Okay, I'll be back in a second. Let me figure out the easiest way. This is just a little too long to pull out of here. Okay, so I found out you do have to, there's a bar that runs from the loader, looks like 3 or 4 bolts up here. It runs back to the rear end on the tractor and has, looks like 2 bolts in the front, 2 bolts on the rear. You have to unbolt that at least enough to swing it out of the way, because that is blocking that filter screen that's on the side of the hydrostatic transmission. So I will come back when I get that off there. Okay, so you definitely want to take forgot to take the lens cap off. You definitely want to take that support bar. It bolts up here to part of your loader. You have 3 bolts that holds it on the front. Then you go back there and it bolts to the rear differential where the rear end bolts in back there. And you have 2 bolts, which 2 of the 4 main bolts that holds the differential in place. You take the front 2 bolts out. So 2 bolts in the back, 3 bolts in the front, and just drop that completely out. Then you see I've got the new filter screen, putting it back in. And you've got the 2 bolts that holds it on. Do not try to take the old one out without taking the bar off. I made that mistake. And there's a metal cap on the end of that screen, and it ended up popping off in the transmission. Then I had to go get a magnet and fish that piece of metal out of there. I got it out, but just made more work than what I should have. Once you get the bolts tight on that, go ahead and put your hose back on. Then tighten your 2 clamps back up. Then come up to the front. And put that bolt back in there that supports that tube. Well, be forewarned, I found out the hard way. You've got to watch for when you're putting that tube back in, that screen filter back in. Even though I lubed the O-ring, I started back together with everything and realized that the O-ring had popped out of place, so I had to tear it back apart. I ended up cutting the O-ring, so I had to replace the O-ring, go back together with it. So be very careful when you're going back together with that. So now the screen's tight, clamps are tight. I got that bolt back in. Let's see. That holds the line in. So now I'm getting ready to put the brace back in that goes to the rear differential. Runs from right there all the way back to the rear differential. Hopefully you can see that. And I've got to put the drain plug back in, but I'm going to put the drain plug in first. Go ahead and top the hydraulics off and start it and make sure that I have no leaks on anything before I put this bar back together, so that I don't have to go through all that of tearing it back apart. I'll show you. You have a sight glass. Well, you put the hydraulic oil in right there, which is facing the rear of the tractor, which would be the same as sitting in the seat. You've got your fill plug up here. And I'm going to have to get some light here so we can see the sight glass. Okay, the sight glass is on the rear, on the right hand side of the PTO facing it. You'll see a red dot. Basically just fill it up till the oil, the hydraulic oil, is up to that red dot, or maybe just a little bit above, but don't totally overfill it. Alright, just to do a summary. First thing, drain the oil out of the transmission. This is on a hydrostatic. The plug is marked with like an orangish color paint on the differential. Next thing, take out your bar that runs from the loader back to the rear diff. You need to take off this bolt And this bolt then come up to the front here, and you have, here's your step, go around here. Inside here you have 2 bolts. Then underneath there you have 1 bolt right there. Let's take these 3 bolts off, the 2 back here. This bar will completely go out of your way. Once your oil's done draining, loosen up those 2 hose clamps. You need to take that off completely there where the tube comes out. Then with this one loose, you can just spin it up, but go ahead and also take out, there is a bolt right back there. Make sure you take that bolt out before you try moving the tube. There's also a nut on that. It's 12 millimeter for that. Drain plug is a 22 millimeter. Make sure you use a good 6-point socket on that, because that will be probably extremely tight like mine was. Then once you pull the hose off, just use something to kind of like hold your main line up out of the way so you can get to that. Take your 2 bolts off for that filter. Do not try to take that out with this bar still in the way, because you cannot get it out of the way. Once you take those 2 bolts off, it'll pretty much pull right out. It's got an O-ring on it. Just kind of work it out. When you're going back together with that filter, make sure you put lubrication on your O-ring, and be very careful, because when I was putting mine back together, the O-ring slipped out of place and I ended up cutting it and have to replace it. Then once you get all that done, change everything and then just go back together in reverse. When you're filling it up, there's a red dot right there. You fill it up to that red dot with the hydraulic oil. Mine's just a little bit above it because I've changed the position of the 3-point hitch arms. That'll vary just a little bit, but do not majorly overfill it. Once you fill it, start it up, give it a little bit to circulate, and run all the controls to make sure you get the air out of it. Then shut it off, let it sit for a minute, and recheck it, because you might have to top it back off. You will want to use, I got this oil from Roll King. This is what they recommended to use, the premium transmission hydraulic oil. You'll need 2 5-gallon buckets, and I would recommend, this is entirely up to you, but I would recommend getting this pump that they've got in there. I believe it was $30. You can just pop the lid off the 5-gallon bucket, and then this has 3 set screws that'll hold it in place. Much easier to put the oil in, and you have absolutely no mess when you're doing it. This will fit down in there, and the way it's curved, it'll stay in place. Makes it much easier, much cleaner.